Creating Engagement in the Classroom, Understanding the Challenges of the Modern-Day Learning Environment
is written by Kevin Popovic and Ryan Vanshur.
Welcome to another webinar in our series, Creating Engagement in the Classroom. I'm Kevin Popovic, a lecturer at San Diego State University. Today we'll learn about the various techniques and strategies professors use to monitor student performance and what the data they collect really means. Is there a better way to gauge performance than a traditional midterm, or are the old-fashioned assessments still king?
We'll be discussing this in greater detail today. I'm Ryan Vanshur, an undergraduate student at San Diego State University and co-author with Kevin of our ebook, Creating Engagement in the Classroom. And today we're going to be discussing formative assessment and real-time results. And we hope this discussion will be of great interest to you.
Today's overview of our webinar includes what are the two leading methods of assessing student performance. We'll be looking at the professor's view as well as the student's view. We'll take a look at 3 proven formative assessments dissected and where the future leads us. And of course, Ryan, we'll always get to Q&A. Here's a secret you may not be privy to, students. Professors are always assessing your performance. In today's crowded and increasingly less intimate classrooms, it may not seem like educators are keeping their fingers on the pulse of the class, but we are. As the classroom has evolved, so have professors' techniques in accomplishing this goal. In past years, though, sweeping assessments like midterms and finals were the go-to methods for instructors to gauge learning in the classroom. Classes identified as midterm and final only were high stakes and high pressure, but the importance of these assessments was always well known, so students generally prepared accordingly.
But there's also another way for educators to see what's working and what's not. And so while midterms and finals still have merit, and they likely always will, the technological advances allow professors to assess student learning and understanding in a way that was never before possible. So contemporary methods permit for the capture of real-time data, which allows professors to make adjustments day by day and week by week before it's too late in the learning process. So historically, we've seen summative assessments like midterms, term papers, finals, have served the primary purpose to measure comprehension in the classroom. And so this type of assessment is intentionally kept separate from the lecture and is designed to assess students at the end of a given learning cycle. The results are usually measured against some predetermined benchmark, like the student's last semester or like a target GPA established within the syllabus. But unfortunately, these high-stakes nature of assessments can really create high rates of stress, and for some students, they instigate academic dishonesty. And then you have formative assessments, which have been around since the 60s, but are just now recently growing more in popularity. And these differ from summative assessments in that they can be formal or informal. They're highly varied, and they're meant to monitor in-progress learning. And that last key is the real point. The formative assessment really measures the comprehension as they go throughout the lesson or activity, which allows that professor to gather the real-time data and collect these types of insights that help hone future classes so that they can better serve each student's unique needs. And today, the formative assessment is widely considered to be one of the more effective instructional strategies used by teachers. And there's a growing body of research that's to evaluate and assess these types of strategies as well.
Now, as a professor, I understand the role of a midterm or a summative assessment to understand how each student is doing from a big picture perspective, just as I understand it's the role at the end of the semester to measure how they did. Similar assessments like a term paper or an individual presentation provides an opportunity to look at the student's understanding of the material cumulatively presented and purposefully applied. The role of formative, though, fills in the blanks in between. Blanks like, do the students understand the material I presented from week 1? Am I okay proceeding as planned in my syllabus to move on to the next concept in week 2, which builds off of a foundation from week 1? If they don't get the basics, how can I move on? The answers may not be what you think. I can move on and often do because the syllabus says I'm supposed to. And if they don't, I will not be able to cover all of the material required to be presented in my class. If I don't present all the material required to be presented in my class, then I have to explain why not. And because I couldn't get my students to learn the material, really isn't a good answer for a professional paid educator to their employer. Now, formative assessments like a scored quiz after my required reading helps increase the percentage of students who read the assigned article and assess the individual's understanding. A low score may indicate lack of participation or a challenge with the material, which initiates an inquiry, what happened on the quiz? Based on the answer, I can help the student within the first week, now when they need the help. The same type of assessments happen weeks 2 through 8, so then I don't have a classroom full of students who didn't get it after the summative midterm exam. So Ryan, let me ask you, what have you experienced in a typical classroom?
So one of the most stressful classes I've actually ever taken involved exactly what you said, a mass of students, their stadium seating, and the grade being determined by only a midterm and a final. And so anytime I have the opportunity to take these smaller size lectures, I always take that chance. The larger class, the larger the class is, the less personalized my experiences have been. And so I've always struggled in these scenarios. And so I'm very hands-on with my learning. I really prefer the real-world experience, as preferred over a textbook. But unfortunately, not many classes are offering this type of learning environment. Most cases, students are being forced to take classes in massive rooms, surrounded by hundreds of other students with just one professor. If you're lucky, maybe a TA or two. But the opportunities for engagement, social learning, student expression, all drastically increase, and the entire educational experience is watered down and less impactful. Some of the quotes that I've gathered from fellow students while exploring this topic. One of the quotes was, my freshman year I took my first college lecture, quote, the class met twice a week, but the only points that counted toward my grade were the midterm and the final exam. I was always very nervous and exhausted from cramming for the exams before going in. And I think this is something common among most students because they place so much value on these two chances for scoring opportunities. Another quote, I love the idea of a one-on-one learning experience. A class where I know the instructor knows me, and if I'm ever confused on a topic or absent from class, somebody actually notices. But the truth is, I haven't had this since high school. And this goes back to, both sides being set up for failure. I don't think it's one fault or the other. I just think it's the environment specifically. One last quote, most of my large lecture classes have few weighted assignments that can make or break your grade. I really prefer smaller classes where I can have more personal experience as well as more assignments to grade from instead of just those 3 exams or a huge term paper. And so I think it's pretty clear across the board, students want more opportunities to gauge their own level of assessment.
Well, first off, I want to start with something that is overlooked as a form of assessment, and that's questions asked to individual students during the lecture. A targeted question and answer session is one of the most common formative assessments seen in the higher education classroom. The professor can ask questions at any time through a lecture, seeking out specific responses from specific students to gauge their learning. This is particularly beneficial as a professor gets to know their students. If the instructor knows a particular student struggles in a particular area and has shown up for office hours for help there, the professor can ask them a question during class to make sure the out-of-class learning stuck. Secondly, we have peer review sessions or self-assessment exercises. Peer review sessions and self-assessment exercises where students assume a dual student-professor role also allow for the real-time capture of the classroom's strengths and weaknesses. By encouraging the student to rate and grade their work in pairs or groups, the professor can save time and identify trends throughout the classroom as a whole. If several students are noticing the same problems, that's something the professor can address at length during the next lecture. Depending on the expected outcomes of these exercises, though, professors could notice some academic dishonesty here as well. Students are sometimes not honest in the assessment of their own learning, and they may also want to take it easy on a friend peer during the review to avoid any backlash.
Finally, we have what are called real-time assessments. So these are representing an increasingly popular type of formative assessment in higher education classrooms. And so usually real-time assessments involve some sort of technology or mechanism that presents students like myself with these questions or polls throughout the class period. And so we'll respond to the prompts. The professors have access to the answers, and which they can then use to tweak and modify for future lessons and teaching strategies. This allows for them to create more quality questions as they go. And so by seamlessly integrating into the professor's lecture, these real-time assessments that help keep the class moving smoothly, but they also allow you to assess learning and allow students to get that real-time feedback on their learning experience. Many professors, are including real-time assessments as part of weekly class presentations. And so with systems, we really tried to develop, our platform CourseKey to be, able to put some well-placed multiple choice questions at the end of a concept to help assess the student understanding. It also helps the professor confirm, that they know what they presented to the class is working. And a series of questions throughout the lecture provides that valuable feedback to the student while they're still there in class and present in the lecture. And when the professors can still help, which is one of the most important parts. So adding points to questions can, provide intermittent grading. It rewards the participation, And this also contributes to the impetus for actually attending the class.
So it's important to note that both the summative and formative assessments have their place in the modern classroom, right? Tried and true summative assessments were the standard inside the classroom for decades, and they likely will never go away. They're remarkably thorough and in-depth, assessing a student's learning throughout the semester in one sweep. Formative assessments, on the other hand, are varied and insightful by nature, capable of molding to each classroom's unique needs. This gives both professors and students various avenues to express themselves and engage with one another to create better learning outcomes. With face-to-face paper and pen and technologically driven options available, each professor can test the waters to determine which type of formative assessments work best for them and their students. Using these assessments to better understand their classroom, professors can then leverage the real-time data collected to tweak and modify future lessons to better serve each student's needs. While formative assessments still have their issues, academic dishonesty, peer review, self-assessments chiefly among them, professors are finding real-time results through technology to be an invaluable combination inside the modern classroom.
So let's jump into the Q&A session for this webinar and kind of wrap up this discussion. So to the professor, how do you personally assess your students' performance? What do you like about your chosen method, and what do you think can be improved?
Well, I actually use a mix because as we've recounted, there are benefits to each. For every article that I ask students to read, there is a small formative assessment. I just want to know, did you get it? Mm-hmm. By putting points on that, I find that students read more of the articles and they're more prepared. And then by a brief quiz, I'm able just to ascertain, did most of the students get the information I need them to get to feel comfortable in moving forward. We also have assessments from the chapters in the book. Again, I need the students to engage with that content because each week we build upon each lesson. The same thing, it's known ahead of time that there's a reading assignment. Before we come into class, there's a brief quiz on that reading assignment because I can then determine which of the students is prepared and which isn't. And then I can go into a lecture about that material, and then I reference back to that quiz, and those people who got the answers wrong, they're able to find out the right answers. So I'm able to reinforce that the learning is mandatory. It's part of the class. I can do some assessment, but I can also then clear up any misperceptions on that content, and I feel much more comfortable moving forward. So here's one back at you, Ryan. What methods can professors use to make you personally feel engaged and comfortable? I mean, you've experienced both formative and summative. What are your thoughts on each?
I think a mix of both is extremely important. I think there's nothing scarier than being a student and getting, a midterm review sheet that kind of goes over what's going to be on the midterm and realizing, you paid absolutely no attention to any of those topics. And so having that's more formative feedback loop inside the class really allows the students to get a better idea of where they should be focusing their time while they're studying outside of the class hour. I do, again, think there's much merit to having midterms and finals and more of those summative type assessments to test your overall progress, because you have to benchmark somehow. Right. But I think also understanding, to put it in terms of sports metrics, knowing your first, second, third, fourth quarter scores are important, but also understanding formatively how many pass, assists, steals, and all the other activities that it took for you to get to those scores is just as important for personal improvement. So I think a combination of both is needed in classrooms. And obviously the hybrid of the two provides a lot more opportunities for learning for both students and professors.
Great questions, great conversation. That concludes our fourth webinar in our series, and even though this one's coming to an end, our conversations still continue.
And as always, you can download the ebook, Creating Engagement in the Classroom, in order to learn more about how to create engagement in your lectures. Whether you're a teacher or a student, we strongly encourage you to join the conversation. You can add comments to our blogs found on our website, creatingengagementintheclassroom.org, and also follow our conversation on social media by using the hashtag #creatingengagement.
Thanks everyone for joining our conversation today, and please consider sharing this with your fellow educators and students so they can share their expertise, opinions, and experiences as well.
Creating engagement in the classroom. Understanding the Challenges of the Modern-Day Learning Environment is written by Kevin Popovic and Ryan Vanshur.
To learn more about creating engagement in your classroom, visit creatingengagementintheclassroom.org or follow #CreatingEngagement.